thank you again for taking the time out of your busy days to learn more about document accessibility. Today, obviously, we're going through understanding your document accessibility toolkit. And as per the countless requests that we got, both in the chat as well as through email, we're going to have today as kind of an interactive demo and walkthrough of a number of products that even we use in our toolkit to make sure that we're making fully accessible and compliant content. As always, we are being captioned by ACS, so thank you ACS and welcome on board again. And if you have any questions, if you put it in the chat pod, I will read it out. And if not, if you could put it in the Q&A section, then everyone can see it. I will always still reiterate it again, but it just helps some people capture that content and read that content easier throughout the presentation. So just to recap where we've been in the last 2 weeks, we started off with understanding the importance of a document accessibility strategy, why it's so important to understand how different documents are created, how they're going to be consumed, who is going to be creating it, who is going to be consuming it, and some of the challenges that you're going to naturally come up against, particularly in higher ed when you're trying to develop an accessibility strategy. And you know, whether that's through initiatives on your own or response to things like an OCR request or a lawsuit, all of the things that I'm hoping you are taking away from this is it doesn't have to be scary. You're able to tackle this in a strategically advantageous way that's cost effective, that will work for the majority of your content types, and recognizing that there isn't a single approach that's going to work for every single type of document that you create. One of the things that we're really big on at AbleDocs is recognizing that we create documents, we remediate documents, we validate those documents, and we educate against those documents. Those are kind of our 4 pillars. And yes, there is a trademark pending on that as part of our new marketing campaign. But recognizing that those 4 pieces are very important and separate pieces of your document accessibility journey. You need different tools. There isn't a single bullet that can solve all of these challenges. So recognizing that you've really got to understand the capabilities of the applications that exist already, the common ones that you use, you know, the Microsoft Office suite, the Google Docs suite, perhaps, or the Open Office. In Europe, it's LibreOffice we see more often. And recognizing what those applications are capable of doing and where their shortcomings are, including InDesign. So really understanding how that workflow of document is going to either help or hinder your ability of making fully accessible and compliant content. And I really want to stress, as I did in the first session, is Readable good enough? And the answer is no, for those of you that weren't on our first session. The reason we make sure that all of our content is accessible and compliant is because you don't know how a reader or an end user is going to consume your content. And if you follow PDF UA and follow the spec, you're now guaranteeing a much greater advantage for an end user who may have a unique adaptive technology or a unique a requirement in how they consume content. You can't just assume that this is for a screen reader on a Windows device at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday morning and the sun is just about here in the sky. It doesn't work that way. And recognizing that the standards help all software developers understand how to convey content and consume content in a much easier fashion. So why don't we start with creation of content? Most people, when they think about authoring documents, we author in things like Word, PowerPoint, Excel, the Google equivalents, the Apple equivalents, the OpenOffice equivalents, or InDesign, right? Most desktop authoring happens in those 5 applications. 5? 4. 4 applications. So we really need to take it apart and say, what are the capabilities? What are the built-in capabilities of all of these applications? So the majority of documents that are written on a desktop are done in Microsoft Office, and specifically Microsoft Word. I am going to dispel one of the worst myths and rumors in all of document accessibility, which is you have to oversimplify your content in order to make it accessible. That is absolutely untrue. It doesn't help anyone with additional reading. And the reason why I say that is Microsoft Word is incapable of generating a fully compliant PDF. And when we're consuming that content, and I'm more than happy to discuss this if people want to ask questions about cognitive disabilities, particularly dyslexia, when it comes to consuming complex content. The problem is we have content that can't be oversimplified. How do we simplify complex chemistry? How do we simplify complex financial tables? We can't. And that's just a reality of the world that we live in. I can't oversimplify a comparative financial table of year-over-year analysis into a few sentences. It just won't work. That's not how accounting works. So remembering that there are going to be limitations. Some of the limitations in Word, for example, include how tables are created. And there was a piece of guidance that was put out, I'm going to say 8 to 10 years ago, it was a long time, that said you should never use tables. Okay, we've moved past that. Adaptive technologies are more than capable of navigating tables, including complex tables, provided that the structure is in place. When we are building out a Word document, we really need to think of some basics, right? We look at structure from headings. We look at capabilities of lists, nested lists, multi-layer is what I mean by that. Tables, when we talk about tables, layout tables, right? Always a bad word in the accessibility world for so many years because it's not effectively conveying the content that's contained within those cells. And you're absolutely right. That is not an effective way of conveying regular layout content if it's in a table. But it's only in a table because of Word's bad output. And I'm not just here to rag on what Word is capable or incapable of doing. This is more awareness building so you know what you're up against when you're creating documents in Word. We talked about the bare minimum of limitations and things like font selection and much more granular things. And if you have specific questions, please feel free to ask. But I want to show you the difference between creating a document using all of the Word capabilities, and then then creating the exact same document using the capabilities of an add-on tool, okay? So I always like to do a quick demo of heading 1. You saw that I did a hard return, right? All those hard returns that you're told not to do. Heading 3. We'll have some equals Laura text. Good paragraph structure. We need some list items. Oh, that should be 4. Pardon me. And then we'll go back to list. What would that be? 6, 7. Why am I having problems with numbers today? I guess it's Thursday. The other thing we'll do is we'll create a table. So I'm going to insert a quick little table here, and I'm going to make sure that in my table, when I go into table properties, I'm going to select my row that will repeat as a header row at the top of each page. Now, if I'm going too fast or if I'm showing you things that you're not aware of, please, again, let me know, slow me down. I have this habit of rushing through things, trying to show some key points of this. But the important part of this is I only have the ability to feature a header row. I have no ability to do a column header. And that's a huge limitation in Word because tables have row headers. That's just the way that it is. So we can't just think about tables as linear pieces of content. They also have horizontal structure. So a big limitation here. Alt text is an interesting one on tables because it isn't required as part of the spec within PDF UA. It is a nice to have, not a must have. And one thing that we often see in alt text descriptions or summaries of tables, which I know will come up as a testing failure in some popular implementations, is it's not necessary because it's often repeating what's in the table itself. And tables are very rarely sitting on their own. There's context to them, particularly in a report or in a longer form document where you've got a description of the data that's going to be included. It's the same thing with alt text when it comes to graphics. So if you use how a how data is going to be presented in that graphic, and you've got a mapped table next to it, you could be confusing the user because they're thinking, I've heard the same thing twice now. Why does this matter to me? So something to keep in mind. Laura, that's a great point about alt text describing the table layout. But if your table is structured properly, the alt text will do it for you. That's one of the cool things. So I'm not going to put an alt. Oh, did I just? I think I did. Sorry, I didn't save that. There we go. Okay. One of the other things we always need an image, and this is not because I'm a narcissist, and anyone on my team who says that I am, we'll talk about this later. Let's use that picture. We'll insert that here. Okay, this is me skiing many years ago. Great. And I'm going to add alt text. So I'm going to format my picture, and I know, yes, we can have the, whoops. Oh, I've changed it again, sorry. Edit my alt text, different version, and I will put in photo of Adam skiing. Okay, so I've got my basic fundamentals within the document. The other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to merge some cells. I'm going to merge those, and I'm going to merge these. Okay, again, very common, and we see it all the time because merged cells are used for a reason. They help us describe content and the relationship of content between one thing or another. So now I'm going to save as an Adobe PDF. And I got a warning somewhere, which is very helpful. There we go. Sorry, I have so many windows open. There we go. Yes, I will save that document. Now, has anyone or everyone or no one heard of PAC 3, the PDF Accessibility Checker Volume 3? I'm hoping yes. Excellent. Jesper definitely has. Matisse, I know you use it all the time. If you didn't, I would severely question your educational training. But PAC 3 is really seen as the industry standard, the gold standard when it comes to PDF UA testing. It's a free tool. It was built in conjunction between an organization in Switzerland and the Swiss equivalent of the AFB, NFB, or the CNIB. And it's really, one of the great advantages of PAC is it's free. There's no reason to purchase it when they are giving it to you. So the good news is it is fully compliant against PDF UA. One of the things that isn't and popularly used for testing is Adobe Acrobat's accessibility checker. Please remember, when you're picking a testing tool, you have to know the limitations of what it's capable of doing. So I will always recommend PAC as your go-to free tool for testing a PDF file. So our PDF is opened, and oh, you know, one thing I didn't do, that's really bad. Hang on, I'm rigging something and I shouldn't be. Let me add my heading, heading 2. I'm amazed nobody called me out on that. Shame on all of you. Okay, now we're good. I will save that again and I will export this PDF. There we go. So now I have a heading structure. And when I open up my tags panel, we can see that I've got these blank P tags, right? I'm going through my tags panel, and this is one of those things, and Laura, I will answer your question in a second. One of the big no-nos is that you can't access, that Word doesn't create a compliant PDF and adds in all of these empty P tags for hard returns. It's just a very sloppy way of accessing the content. In order to get PAC, I'll put in a download link as well. And thanks, Matisse. We also have it hosted, and you can find it there. It's the first thing that comes up when you search PDF accessibility testing. PAC is the first thing that comes up. So all of our paragraph cells, and then our list. And you'll notice in these list elements that it only contains the L body. Now, from a strict compliance perspective, this is a compliant way of tagging a list, but from a usability perspective, not having the bullet separated into an LBL or a label tag is one of those things that really sets us back from especially reflow of content. So keep that in mind. We have our nested list here, and again, all of those L bodies are displaying it with the LBL. When we get to the table, this is where it starts to get a little messy. We have a P tag that contains all of these components of the path. So the elements that contain all of the line art, completely unnecessary, doesn't need to be there. And depending on the reader that you're using can cause a reading problem because it thinks that there should be a figure, but there isn't. When we get to the label, all of a sudden we have a TD cell, and if I bring up the table properties and I go into the tag, you will see that there, oh shoot, I went to the wrong one, attribute. There are no attributes as it pertains to the table cell. And the important thing to remember with this is that when you don't have a mapping of this element, that it actually spans 2 rows, a user won't realize that their table is not square. And I'm going to show you something really quickly as soon as we get through this, that becomes a huge readability and usability problem for a screen reader user. So we have our final image, and because it's in line, our figure tag is embedded within a P tag, which makes no sense. There's no need for this whatsoever. Now, obviously we've got our alt text, which is great, but if I run a test on this file using Pack, simple drag and drop, it's going to show me that I've got 72 tags over 2 pages, and I'm throwing a whole bunch of errors, right? I've got over 42 errors within the document. And I've got issues in my structural elements, my structure tree, my metadata, and my document settings. And where this, I'll answer the Matt question in a second. Where this becomes a problem is how a file is going to be able to be consumed by a reading device, whether that is a screen reader, a braille display, a reflowable device, and a screen size difference that creates a problem for a reader to reflow this content. Now, a quick few features. 1, Pack 3 is only available on PC. Unfortunately, that's the reality when the funding was not provided to the organization to build a Mac version. I will say I have some inside knowledge that a version for the web and a version for Mac is in development planning and should be released, one version by the end of this year and the next version by the end of Q1 of next year. So stay tuned, it's coming. Some of the cool features in Pack that really make it easy, and one of the questions that I very frequently get asked is, teach me how to use a screen reader. And this is from a testing perspective. And I completely understand why everyone wants to become a screen reader savant, an aficionado, if you will. The problem is a sighted user who's using a screen reader is not going to understand how an end user is going to consume that content. And that becomes a really big problem. I've been using a screen reader now for well over 12 years, and I still have a problem remembering all of my keyboard commands and accessing all of the features that may come up in a document. That is in no way me telling you to be discouraged about learning how to use a screen reader, but you've got to remember how you're going to interact with the content is just as important of passing a checker or passing a test. So a few things. 1, Pack will show you the results in detail. And as I load this, of course it comes in one of my other displays, I get a completely granular view of all of the issues that are coming up in my document. And they highlight and locate all of the issues within the document. Really easy. And now it also shows me that I've got table irregularity, right? What this means is we call it making sure a table is square. There are enough cells in the table for columns and rows to equal a square. And the best feature, in my opinion, within Pack is this function called Screen Reader Preview. For a sighted user, Screen Reader Preview allows you to visually see the layout of every cell and every piece of content that is tagged and the linear reading order of how that will be presented to a screen reader or an adaptive technology. Okay? Is there anything that I'm going too fast on with the linearization of content or things like that? I'm hoping not. Contrast is a great question, Jesper. We'll get there. So When we go through this document, we can see that we've got empty cells. So as a navigation rule, anytime there's a p tag, a user may have to arrow through that, which can, again, become very confusing. The more blank p tags that you have, a user could just start hitting arrow down and move through this content without recognizing, oh, I skipped some content. It becomes very confusing and very unnecessary for the user. In the list, we've, again, got our structure there, but this is what I wanted to highlight. Tables. When we see this table, you can see this blank purple area. It means that where this cell should have had a merged cell, it isn't. And yes, Cheryl, it is being recorded. So you've got this blank cell, which is showing that our table is not square. And when we have an unsquare table, that means a user navigating through this table is going to come up to a point and say, wait a second, shouldn't there be information here? I'm confused. And that confusion leads to a misunderstanding of the information. Think if we had data in here, financial data is a great example. If this was your savings account and you were trying to figure out how much money you had, and all of a sudden it comes across as blank, or you now owe money that's in this column, you'd be very confused and probably calling your bank and yelling at them. That's why the squaring of a table is so important. So let's use the same document. I'm going to minimize that, and up here. Now I'm going to generate, so the next product that I'm going to show you is called Access Word. It used to be called Access PDF for Word. It is in the process of being rebranded, so forgive me if I slip up on my tongue while I show you through the demo. One of the things that is great about this is that it leverages all of the existing capabilities within Word. However, it kind of supercharges them and says, we know how to generate a fully accessible and compliant PDF using a better analytic and algorithm to generate the tag structure. It understands what's in the document and how that's going to be consumed vis-a-vis PDF UA. So I don't need to change anything in this document other than when I come to this table, you'll see that all of a sudden we got this situationally or semantically aware panel. And it says, hey, you're in a table. What's up with that? We've got two different options for a table. We can have a data table or a layout table. And that's one of the biggest differences in what you can do with a tool that understands how authors create documents. Tables make it easy to organize content on a page. I'm sure if I asked for a show of hands, you would all fly your hands in the air saying, yes, tables are easy. The difference is when we have a layout table, we can choose how we want that content read. Left to right, top down, left to right, left, top down, right, left, etc., etc. When is this really helpful? Multiple languages. Languages that read right to left, for example, would be really helpful in this type of a table layout. When you're looking at navigating people through or pulling people through a journey of content from a columned perspective, because by default, a screen reader is going to read left to right, top to bottom, this all of a sudden gives you so many more options and will pull it out in a styled way. So if you have heading styles or different mapping of tags in this table, those will always be respected when you select layout table. In this case, we're going to stay with a data table. Now there are two types of data tables, which is really neat. We have a simple table or a complex table. So when we start looking at complexity, we can map that heading structure very easily through creating a new style. So I'm going to go TH1, and I'm going to map that and create a new style. And I'm going to call this THR for row. Oh, maybe I'll do it as row. There we go. Okay, and now I want to assign that all the way across. And then I can have these I'm going to map these as column. And again, I would recommend that you do this in advance as opposed to while you're doing this. But the great thing is you can change it on the fly. It's completely customizable as you go. And then we can go into the document setting panel. And in here, we can map th column. I'm going to map this into a header cell for a simple table, right? We don't have that much complexity in here. And I'm going to say, well, a THC, I want it to map as a column. And a TH row, I want to map as a row. And now it's done, right? Now we're going to see this mapping. Access Word is a program that is installed right now. Yes, it is an add-in to Word. So once that's completed, now I've got the ability to say, okay, what else am I going to do? The other thing you'll see is when I select a figure, I get another awareness panel that says, is this a figure, is it a formula, or is it decorative? Is it just for design? In this case, it is an image. I want to describe it, so I'm going to keep it as a default, which is figure, but you always have that option. And again, it's the same thing with any object that comes up. Sasha, I see that you're asking about charts and flow charts and pie charts. Those are always going to be treated as a single image. Now, the way that you overcome that, there could be work that's done after the fact, but a chart is always going to be a single image. The associated table can also be recognized as a table, but you do need to map that separately. Once all of those steps are complete, now I'm going to export my PDF. And when I export it, I need to save my file. Save as. I will save this as 2. And it gives me a reminder that I need to put in a title. In this case, I'm going to do test doc 2. My language is set to USA, and I also have the option of selecting PDFA for archiving. I will create, and Renee, I definitely will talk about InDesign. So the file's created. Here's the PDF. You'll see that the bookmarks are created automatically, and they're also nested. I go into my tags panel, and you'll notice that all of those hard returns are gone, right? We now have a much cleaner tag structure through the document. In my list, you'll notice that the LBL is present. And as I go to my nested list, it's the same thing. And there's nothing wrong with having a P tag nested within an LBL, or within an L body, my apologies. That's fully compliant with the standard. When I go to the table, you will notice that I also now have my row headers. And when I go to this second cell, I'm going to go into my object attributes, and you'll see that I have a row span 2. So now, when I go into pack with this document, 1, it's fully compliant. And when I go into the screen reader preview, you'll see that my structure doesn't have empty tags, and my table is completely square. And see how visually you can see that this spans 2 rows and 2 columns. And often what we find in a lot of questions that we're asked are, in Acrobat, it's not telling me what's wrong with my table, it's just telling me I have something wrong. This is such an easier and visual way of recognizing, wait, my table isn't square. Now what do I do? So those are 2 really quick, unfortunately we've only got an hour today. I'm more than happy to do another session on a deep dive, but those are 2 quick and easy demonstrations of 2 products that if they're in your toolbox, it makes it that much easier to see some of those issues. Now, if you are a remediator, right, someone who makes documents accessible on a regular basis, one of the things that I would recommend you look at is really a power tool. I guess, hang on, let me just see if I've missed anything on Pack. So Pack, no, currently is not supported on Mac, nor is it supported on Chromebook, unfortunately, Carolyn. And Jesper, color contrast is a great question. So PDF UA, as I mentioned in our first session, does not have any content requirements, okay? So you write your document the way that you write your document, or design your document. Color contrast is one of those things where, yes, it is very important. It is more important in a printed context, because in a digital context, we can change our color contrast as it is in the file itself. And I can show you that actually. Maybe we'll go here. If I go to Edit, Preferences, and I go into my accessibility structure option, I can replace my document colors, and I can use a high contrast view. So I can use green text on black. Let's try that. And it will automatically change my document to change all of my content. Now, it is looking for contrast ratios, and as you can see, my headings are not changed to be very effective. If you are looking at how someone is going to access their content, I'm going to change that again, preferences. And I want white text on black, right? You'll see that because this is colored, it's not inverting, and it's one of those limitations in this viewer. Other viewers have no issue with it. So you've got to keep in mind, what applications am I using? And same with table. Actually, that's really interesting. I didn't realize it wouldn't change table. Haven't tested it in a while, I guess. So those are some of the advantages that you've got in the viewer itself. I'm going to not replace those. There we go. So one of the other applications you can use is Quick Fix. And this is now going to be called Access PDF. And it's very similar to the, well, it's quite honestly, most of the architecture is very similar to PAC. The difference is, this is really a power tool. So if you're a remediator and you're trying to overcome some of the issues that you're finding, if I'm in the checker mode on the right here, and I apologize, my screen's probably too big and my magnification is too small for you to easily see that. But when I select refresh, you'll see a very similar structure here that you saw in PAC. The advantage that I have is I can start changing some of my errors. So for example, I want to add a PDF UA identifier. I'll hit that button, and if I select refresh, all of a sudden that metadata error went to a check mark. Great, now that's done. I can also look at things like, I didn't create any links, so I apologize, but I can set the contents key of the link annotation. So many of you will see that there's a link error, and Jessica, it is called Access Quick Fix. Right now, those names are one and the same, but it will be migrating to Access PDF only. So when you start to see some of these issues and I start identifying some of the problems, I'm able to now assess where I can fix that within Quick Fix and where I may need to fix them in Acrobat or another application. The other thing I can do is in table, this is a really cool feature. I can see what my table issues are, and I can map them. Oops, properties. And you can see that I can come into this cell. Why is that not mapping? Am I not grabbing it? There we go. So you can see that I can add a row span or call span, or I can identify headers. So I can select this row, and I can select that I want this as, select all. Oh, there aren't any in this. But I'm able to identify what these problems are, and I can adjust them on the fly. So again, a really powerful tool. And I want to do a deep dive on this on its own, but we do only have like 25 minutes. So if you have any questions, feel free to email us and I'll walk through them. Again, you're really able to see, do I want to fix a broken PDF? Do I want a Unicode Map is another great feature in here. Oh, where my font? You can pull up all of the Unicode mapping of every font in the document and see, is this really a comma, or do I need to change it to something else? It makes it that much easier for us to map and make sure that all of that font detail is passed on to an end user, which is critical. Carolyn, your closed captioning, there's a button under More that can select closed captioning and hide that. It's also on the bottom panel. So that is Quick Fix. Sorry, Access PDF. Slap my hand. There were questions about other applications, so I want to get to that. So the accessibility checker, let's start there in Acrobat. As I mentioned in, I think it was session 1, there are a few features in Acrobat that are helpful, but there's a few that are dangerous. And when it's dangerous is things like the read out loud function. As many of you will remember, Adobe Read Out Loud is not a screen reader. It is a simple text-to-speech engine, and it is not to be used for testing purposes. It is very rudimentary. No adaptive technology user would ever consider using it because you can't navigate content the way that you would in using a screen reader like JAWS, NVDA, or VoiceOver. So that's something really important to keep in mind. The other thing to remember is the accessibility checker. So I'm currently in Acrobat DC. There's also an accessibility checker in 10, 11, and 12. So keep that in mind. And when I go testing my file for accessibility, do I have that even open here? I don't. One of the things that you need to look at is, what am I getting as part of my result? Did I lose my accessibility feature? Where did I go? I delete, sorry. I never use it, so I removed it. So when I run my accessibility check and I want to create my report, I can test all of my content based on the document, page content, forms, tables, and lists, but I want the document. I want everything in this document. So I'm going to start checking. And it's showing that I've got a list issue and I've got a label problem. Now, the checker in Acrobat it's a very well-known error. It does not recognize LBL in a table, and it has a problem with third-level nested lists. It's just a reality of what you're finding. So again, there's nothing I can do about it other than use a better testing tool. The other interesting thing is this table. So this is from the first document that I created. Remember that one? The one with the table irregularity? So in Acrobat, it's showing that we only have 3 issues. In the document, I've got an irregularity in my, I've got a summary skipped and an LBL problem. But in PAC, I'm showing that many more errors because I've got so many issues with other types of problems in the document. And when it's saying that you've got a color contrast issue, where do I have a color contrast issue in readable text? And the answer is, I don't. I may have a contrast issue within the image, but you've got to recognize some of the limitations of the color contrast analyzer. And recognizing that manual checks are always going to be required regardless of what your testing tool says. But you now see that in this table, there are no issues with the irregularity in the table. But this same file, right, heading 1, when I go to screen reader preview, my table is a disaster. It's not showing that those cells are not mapped. And now a reader, when you think you've been checking and passing all of my Acrobat checks, you're not going to be seeing that the difficulty in reading the file. So always make sure that you're accessing the right testing tool for the right application. And both PAC and Access PDF or Quick Fix will find those issues. So will Common Looks Checker, not to bypass anything. And I know there was a question earlier about using the word checker built into the Microsoft suite. It doesn't test for anything important. Most of the checking is saying, do you have alt text? Do you have hard returns between your content? And that's about it. Because of the limitations of what Word is able to generate, we get asked all the time, my document needs to pass the word checker. Okay, what's it testing against? And the answer is not a heck of a lot. If I'm using my accessibility test within Word, I'm going to come back here, review. Where's my accessibility test? There we go, check accessibility. I've got a table cell, wonderful. Now, why is my fixing a problem? And the problem becomes, its first answer is to simplify the table structure. And that's not a viable option for us if we have complex data within the table. So it's giving really poor guidance to overcome the limitations within the application. So always keep that in mind. When we're talking about Google's applications don't generate a well-tagged document. They just can't. For many, many years, we couldn't even get a simple tag out of a document. So you've really got to remember how your authoring limitations prohibit you from generating an accessible document from the word go. Again, I'm not trying to dissuade you from being a better author and understanding what these documents are capable of doing, but you've got to be using the right applications to generate this content. Otherwise, you're always going to run up against these challenges. You're absolutely right. Natasha, you're mentioning that the tools seem more proficient than attempting to remediate a PDF using Acrobat and manipulating the table structure. You're right. Now, one thing I will say, Everything you need to do to make a PDF UA compliant can be done within Adobe Acrobat. It can. But recognize how much time do you want to spend fixing the document versus generating a fully compliant file. There was a question earlier about InDesign. InDesign, even though it's an Adobe product, it is not capable of generating a fully UA compliant PDF. Can't do it. Now, there's a tool called Made to Tag, and I will write that in here just so we don't made to tag. There we go. And it's able to generate a much more accessible file. It's looking at the way that a reading order is built. It's looking how a structure needs to be created. Similar to Access Word, you're seeing how a reading order is generated and how a user is going to interact with the content, and it generates a much better file. There are still limitations to it, but you're getting much further down the road. And if you can understand the tools that are needed, you're mitigating your exposure and risk on creating inaccessible content. And that's really a critical part. Mark's asking what the best workflow is to remediate a document created in Google Docs. Import it to Word first. To be honest, probably. So many people are migrating to Google Docs because they feel it's a cheaper option. The reality is it's so much oversimplification in the application. And I know Word is a very powerful tool, but you have to recognize it's powerful because of the capabilities it has. So if you're able to bring that Google Doc into Word, then you've got a much further step ahead. Grackle Docs is another add-on tool that's a great option. It builds an accessible structure. It doesn't necessarily always build a compliant structure, but you're going to be minimizing, sorry, I'll slow down a bit. Grackle Docs, Grackle Docs. Grackle Docs is an add-on to Google Docs, and it will generate a tagged PDF. Always make sure you're testing. There are no testing tools in Google's platform, so make sure you're testing, again, with the right tool. And anyone who's not using Pack, I scratch my head. It's free. There is a new version coming out as well shortly, so stay tuned for that. That will have some more features and make it even easier for you to see some of the problems that you're up against. InDesign always becomes that much more complicated. And so from a workflow standpoint of any of your documents, recognizing if you don't have any of these additional power tools or creation tools that generate compliant content, you will always need to bring it back into Acrobat to fix up some of your problems. And the question again is, how much time do you want to spend doing it? Now, if you have an internal remediation team or a center of excellence at your school, making sure that they have the right tools, that's a huge step forward. Making sure your authors have generation tools that can minimize the amount of effort that's needed by your center of excellence, that's also taking you many steps forward to make it easier to manage your document accessibility. If you are already dealing with a PDF, so if you can't control the creation process, you need to seriously invest in tools that will help make your job easier, or build a strategy that does, as we discussed last week. Making sure you're minimizing your exposure to be sustainable. So if I can create a document, I'm making creation software do the heavy lifting. I'm not relying on bad authoring applications to do everything and then try and fudge my way through the accessibility side of it. You've got to remember what the capabilities are and where your limitations are. So one, create, right? Our recommendation, you would always be looking at something like an Access PDF for Word or Access Word to generate a more compliant content. There are more versions coming for PowerPoint and Excel, but you know, there are other applications as well. It's how you want, so like Common Look, you've got the ability to look at how a workflow is going to happen. Do you want someone to be a document accessibility expert or a great author? And what I will say is, and I will not embarrass us all by raising our hands, I will take the bullet, we are all guilty of bad authoring practices. We all do it, right? That's okay until you start to get into exposure of risk for document accessibility. And that's always some of the challenges that we deal with. Knowing what you're creating is half the battle. Then, if you are testing, and I will tell you, after having been an expert witness in a number of cases, the first thing I do when I'm going to test a PDF, I'm going to run it through Pack. And there's no way that any judge or lawyer shouldn't be using that, saying, is it compliant or not? So is Readable good enough? No, because we can't guarantee that it could be read on more than one device. You've always got to remember, what am I potentially up against? And if I can minimize my cost for generating content, then I can invest in remediation of complex content, things that are coming out of InDesign that will need the hands-on, up to your elbows into a PDF file to fix those issues. So you really need to take a multi-tiered approach or a multifaceted approach to understanding how you create, how you validate, and how you remediate your content, and then teaching how you're going to really understand what those results are. Not everyone in your organization is going to be a document accessibility expert. It's just not going to happen. And that becomes a really important part of how you generate an accessible strategy for your content. Thanks, Jesper. Yeah, there's also the accessibility assistant for Word and PowerPoint. That comes from a company out of Denmark called Skabelon Design. They've got a great way of getting much further down the road and creating more accessible content. So you've got to be looking at all of these options of how am I going to fill my toolbox with the most accessible options for making documents accessible. And that's always got to be in the back of your mind. Even we do that internally as document accessibility experts. We use these tools on a daily basis because it makes our job easier. We have a policy as an organization. No document leaves our shop unless it's fully accessible and PDF UA compliant. That is a hard, fast rule. And that means we can't send every single document we create through our production team. Our authors have to make sure that their content is accessible. And when it starts to become second nature and the tools make it easier, now you're really building a successful document accessibility strategy. And when you're looking at it from a higher ed perspective, balancing what you can create internally versus what you need to rely on from external vendors like publishers. How do you manage all of that exposure and inaccessible content to the people that matter most? Your students, your future students, your current students, and maybe staff who have print disabilities that also need access to that content. Mark asked a question, what's the best approach for PowerPoint and can they be made fully accessible? The answer is absolutely. As soon as it comes into PDF, it can be fully accessible and compliant. If you are keeping your PowerPoint deck in PowerPoint, there are limitations as to what you can do. Again, there's no standard for PowerPoint, just like there isn't a standard for Word or Excel, but provided you're using a structured layout within PowerPoint, so any of the default or customized structures that have a heading and a body layout, you're adding alt text, you're using list structures, that will be more readable. Smart art is not. The best way to make smart art accessible or any of those charts or graphs would be to bring it into PDF. The only thing you can do is create a single alt text attribute. Oh, sorry, in smart art, you can now do partial alt, but the navigation, the reading order is based on a linear list. So that's the best way to access that content. My recommendation is yes, slides should be, the question is, should slides be converted to PDF? Yes. The only reason you're not keeping them in PDF is so that you can have neat animation. At the end of the day, nobody cares about your slide transition. It's one of those things where I always laugh and it's like, okay, this is really, you're doing this because you think it looks cool. It was like, what was that document format? What was that web application where you could spider through content? Oh, I'm going blank. If someone can remember it, that would be really helpful. Prezi. Thank you, Michael. You win. Oh, we got 3. Michael Terra and T. Weisenberger, you win the prize for Prezi. Horrendously inaccessible, but yes, it zooms and moves around. And we always get that with page transitions for presenting a PDF online. Nobody cares. Nobody cares about how you're going to transition a page. People want content. Those flipbook add-ins for websites. Horrendously inaccessible. The first thing it does, even if you have a fully tagged PDF, is strip all of that content out. And that becomes the challenge. Jenna asks an interesting question about slides being in PDF, that students complain about slides being in PDF because they have limited print options. I'm not aware of any print options from PDF unless you have a restriction on a permission setting. That would be the only one. I know you could potentially limit your notes, but if you went from PowerPoint into PDF with the notes section, you've got the same printing options. And arguably, you could make it more accessible by making that panel, that notes panel, a fillable form. And now a student could write those notes next to the document if they wanted, or next to that page layout if they wanted. Yeah, actually, Jenna, send me an email. I'm really curious about that. Carolyn asks, is there a tool to convert document content to HTML? We need to post content on our public-facing web pages. The answer is yes. The longer answer is it's not that simple. But if you start from an accessible PDF, the export to HTML will be significantly better. Because you're able to pull a semantic markup, you're able to get a much better HTML experience. We don't have time to go into it, but Carolyn, if you want to send me an email, I'm happy to send you more details on how to do that, or some tools that you can use to make it easier for you. Right now, there is not a silver bullet for it. Are there any other questions? We've got 5 minutes. It's amazing how quickly this goes, because I could probably be here all day. This is the third and final session in our series. Oh, the reality is we can hold another one. If people have more questions or want to have another session about specific elements or want a demo of another application, we'd be happy to do that. So you can please feel free to send an email to webinar@abledocs.com or connect with us on LinkedIn or back through. Oh, we've got a couple more questions. Okay, so I'm going to have to read these through. We're going over 12 o'clock. There's no question. So Bridget asks, please repeat what I said about notes on PDF. My students complain that they cannot write notes on a PDF when I convert it to slides. Or I'm guessing from slides. So Bridget, the comment would be, you absolutely can write notes on a PDF, provided that they have a copy of Adobe Reader. They would be more than happy to, they're more than capable of adding comments. They can even edit the PDF. If they're doing it in a free viewer or on a web viewer, they can't. But they also wouldn't be able to do that with PowerPoint. So you need to have an application that's capable of doing that. And you've got to, again, when you're looking at tools, you would need to be looking at how am I going to interact with this content? And there's no reason why there would be a limitation on accessing that through Adobe Acrobat. You can also edit it. There's a question from Allison about Foxit. Foxit can generate tags, and you can edit PDFs within Foxit. Personally, it's not my tool of choice, but it's capable. There are certain limitations. There are certain issues that will arise that you may need an additional tool like Quick Fix to adjust. But again, generating a PDF from it, test it through Pack, see what you come up with, and then determine whether you need additional tool sets to fix that. Chris asks, I've seen a recommendation that in most cases, we should create accessible Word docs and make them read-only, but not convert to PDF. The idea behind this is that it gives the reader the opportunity to change font type, background color, font size in a way that's not easy to do with a PDF. Nonsense. Absolute nonsense. I cannot more strongly urge you not to do that. You can change all of that within Acrobat or Reader. You have that option. So again, provided your security settings in Word, which if they are set for accessibility, allows you to do all of that, you can reflow your content, you can change your zoom, you can change your font color, you can change your background color. All of that can be done within PDF. And I would suggest that most of that advice is being provided by people who don't understand the inner workings of the power that exists within it. And again, I'm not just a PDF guy. Where content should be in a different format, it should be. But Word should never be distributed, ever. And read-only doesn't protect your content, right? Someone can still extract that. And the security settings in Word, if I come into a different format, like in Google, where I can still open a docx, all of that goes away. So you're not protecting your document at all. The issue students have with PowerPoint converted to PDF is that they can't print 6 or 9 slides per page. Actually, Mark, there is an add-on tool that you can. But if you're printing like that, then a student with a print disability isn't going to be able to access that content anyways. So yes, you could repurpose that content. Heck, you can even go from PDF back into PowerPoint if you wanted to print on a multi-page. But from an accessibility perspective, that becomes a huge burden. We get asked by learning groups if we can tag that printed off slide layout. And the answer is yes, but as soon as you print a PDF like that, all of a sudden your font is now down to a 2-point font, and it makes it much more difficult to tag after the fact. There's a question about a Q&A session. Yeah, we can put a Q&A session together. We could do an interactive webinar where you can bring your questions, and I'm happy to answer them on the fly. Hopefully I don't put my foot in my mouth too far, but we would be happy to do that. Did I miss any questions? So far, I have not. Yes, this session is being recorded. There will be an email going out with links to all 3 of the sessions that we've done over the last 3 weeks. So stay tuned for that email. That's coming probably by tomorrow, or hopefully by tomorrow. If not tomorrow, it will be Monday. And feel free to share that session on. And again, if you have any questions or would like to do an additional session, reach out and we'll put something together. I really appreciate all the time you've taken over the last 3 weeks spending with me, and again, looking forward to helping you make your documents accessible. I don't have my contact information again, but if you ever have any questions, feel free to send it to webinar@abledocs.com, which I'm writing in this panel. And again, really appreciate the time and looking forward to speaking with you all soon. Thanks again, stay safe, and we'll talk then. Bye-bye.